I am a widowed father in my mid-60s, a man who has grown used to the quiet creak of floorboards and the slow tick of clocks in a house filled with memories. My wife has been gone for years now, and in her absence I have built a life of repetition. Morning coffee at the same kitchen table, the same worn chair by the window, the same stack of books that rarely changes. My days are steady, but they are also hollow. The silence is thick enough to press on my chest at times. And the only real interruptions are the calls from my daughter. That Thursday morning the phone rang earlier than usual. I recognized her number, and I already knew from the brightness in her tone that she was about to ask for something. She never calls without a reason. This time, though, she dressed her request in cheerful words. She told me it was her husband's birthday on Saturday, a family celebration at the most expensive restaurant in town. She said I should come dressed in a proper suit, that I should bring the car, that everyone would be there. On the surface, it sounded like an invitation, but the way she lingered on those details told me something more. The way she urged me to be presentable, the way her voice quickened at the end of the call, as if she was hiding a secret weight beneath that false cheer. I hung up and stood in the stillness of my kitchen, staring at the phone in my hand. The invitation did not feel like a gesture of love, it felt like a setup. Somewhere deep down I understood that the dinner was not about family, it was about me and what they expected from me. The phone call came on a Thursday morning when the house was still heavy with the kind of silence that settles after years of living alone. My coffee had barely finished brewing when the ringtone cut through the kitchen. The number was familiar, the same name flashing on the screen that had so often brought requests for help, for money, for something I was expected to provide. It was my daughter, Elaine. I hesitated before answering, already bracing myself for what she might want this time. Her voice carried a false brightness, a tone she used whenever she needed to cover something beneath it. She told me that her husband Noah was turning 35 on Saturday and that there would be a family dinner to celebrate. Not just any dinner, but a gathering at Moonlight, the most expensive restaurant in town, the one with glass walls and waiters in starched shirts, the one I had never stepped into. She listed the details with precision, as though reading instructions off a card. Saturday at 7, make sure to wear a suit. Drive the car, she added, as if the way I arrived mattered more than my presence. I listened quietly, letting her words wash over me, though each one left its mark. She did not ask if I was free, she did not ask how I was, and she did not even bother to pretend that this was about spending time together. The invitation felt rehearsed, transactional. When she mentioned the suit, something inside me shifted. I have only one suit. The same one I wore when I buried my wife, and the same one I had worn on her graduation day so many years ago. To Elaine, it seemed less important that I was there and more important that I looked the part, that I would not embarrass her in front of Noah's family. I told her yes, that I knew the restaurant, that I would be there. My voice sounded steady, though inside me a storm was beginning to stir. The call ended quickly. She had no time for conversation. No time to ask what my days had been like, how I was sleeping, or whether I had eaten breakfast. She hung up with the same mechanical efficiency with which she had spoken. I stared at the phone for a long moment afterward, as though the silence left behind was heavier than the one before. I sat down at the kitchen table, coffee cooling in my hand, and replayed her words. The instructions clung to me like unwelcome guests. Wear a suit, bring the car, be on time. None of this sounded like a daughter reaching out to her father out of love. It sounded like preparation, as though I was being positioned for a role in some performance. I had been part of enough of these performances already, paying for her wedding that drained my savings, covering the down payment for their car, wiring money when pipes burst or when a vacation seemed too expensive. Every time I had convinced myself that this was what a father should do, that love was measured in sacrifice. But lately I had begun to wonder if sacrifice was all I had left to offer. The warning signs were there, bright and undeniable. If this were just a birthday dinner, why such attention to appearances? Why did she stress the suit, the car, the restaurant? I could almost hear Linda's voice in my memory, gentle but clear, telling me to be cautious, telling me to see things as they were, not as I wished them to be. Linda had always been able to read the truth between the lines. I had ignored those instincts too many times before. Still, I told myself maybe it was different this time. Maybe it was just a dinner, a chance to sit across from my daughter and talk without the shadow of money hanging between us. A fragile hope flickered inside me, though it felt dangerous to trust it. I carried my cup to the sink, set it down with more force than I meant to, and let the water run until steam rose around my hands, in the glass above the sink. I caught sight of my reflection, an old man, gray-haired and lined with years, staring back at me with suspicion. The phone call lingered long after it ended. It was not what she said, but how she said it. The false cheer, the careful instructions, the hurry to get off the line. A signal had been sent, though she did not realize how loudly it rang. Something about Saturday would not be right. I felt it deep in my chest, the way you feel a storm before the first thunderclap. And yet, I knew I would go, because despite the warning, despite the ache of being used again, she was still my daughter. And a father does not easily turn away, even when he knows he might be walking straight into a trap. When the call ended that Thursday, I sat there staring at the phone as if it had left a mark on my kitchen table. The silence pressed in again, but now it was filled with memories I had tried to bury. Every word from Elaine had stirred them loose, pulling me back through the years, through every time she had needed me to step in, to cover the costs, to be the one who carried the burden. It began long before Noah entered the picture, back when she was still in college. Tuition bills arrived with numbers that made my stomach tighten, but I never let her see the strain. Linda and I had saved for years, and still it wasn't enough. I took on extra tutoring, even worked part-time jobs during summers, anything to fill the gaps. I told Elaine she should focus on her studies, that she shouldn't worry about money. I thought I was giving her freedom. I see now I was planting the seed of expectation. Then came the wedding. I remember sitting at the dining table with Linda late into the night, a stack of estimates between us. Catering, flowers, venue, the numbers looked like mountains. Noah's parents offered help, but there was a sneer behind their voices, a sense of superiority that cut at me. I swore I would not let them think we couldn't provide for our daughter, so we signed the loan papers, drained our savings, mortgaged the future for one glittering night. Elaine smiled in her dress, radiant under the lights, and in that moment I told myself it was worth every penny. But when the music faded, the bills remained. The pattern only grew heavier. A new kitchen remodel that could not wait, a car that broke down at the worst time, vacations that seemed out of reach until she called and I found a way to make them happen. Each time she promised it was the last. Each time I believed her or wanted to. I told myself that helping her was keeping our bond alive, that money was the price of closeness, but Linda saw it clearly. One evening, after Elaine had called asking for money to cover a trip she could not afford, Linda turned to me with that look of gentle sorrow. She said we had raised a daughter who believed love was measured by how much we gave, not how much we shared. I brushed it off, told her it was just a phase, that Elaine would outgrow it. Now, years later, with Linda gone, I realized my wife had been right all along. The ledger of sacrifices stretched farther than I wanted to admit. The down payment for Elaine and Noah's first house, pulled from my retirement account, penalties and all. The endless repairs, the upgrades, the whispered requests followed by polite thank yous that felt thinner each year. My pension was steady but modest, yet I gave as if it were endless, what I never gave. What Elaine never asked for was my time. Not once did she call just to ask how I was spending my day, if the nights were too long, if the house felt too empty without Linda. She called for help, for money, for support. I gave it all, and in return I received silence once the problem was solved. As I sat at the kitchen table, memories stacked themselves in my mind like unpaid bills. It was not anger I felt then, but a kind of exhaustion. A bone-deep weariness that made me wonder how I had allowed it for so long. I thought of Saturday, of the restaurant, of the insistence on the suit and the car. This was not new. It was simply another entry in the ledger, another charge on the account of being a father too willing to give. For years, I told myself that sacrifice was the duty of a parent, that Elaine needed me more than I needed to protect myself. But now, staring at the phone, I began to question if what I had done was sacrifice at all, or if it was something else entirely. Enabling, surrender, a refusal to face the truth that my daughter no longer saw me as a father to be loved, but as a resource to be tapped. Saturday was approaching, and I could feel the weight of another request waiting at the end of that dinner table. The call had been the opening move. The real game had yet to be played. After the call ended and the memories faded back into silence, I found myself clinging to something I could barely name. It was not logic, it was not evidence. It was hope, thin, trembling hope that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. I wanted to believe that Saturday could be what she had promised, a family dinner, nothing more. I sat by the window looking out at the San Mateo Mountains. Their ridges were painted gold in the morning light. A sight that once made Linda insist we pack a basket and drive out for picnics. Those days were gone, but the beauty remained. As I watched the mountains, I let myself imagine something softer. What if Elaine really wanted me there just as her father? What if for one night I could sit at the table and be more than the man who footed the bill? The thought was dangerous but comforting. I pictured her smiling, introducing me proudly as her dad. I imagined her leaning in, asking how I had been, maybe even telling me that she missed the way we used to talk. In my mind, I allowed myself to hear her laughter again, the sound she made when she was still a child, still mine. That sound had not reached me in years, but the memory of it stirred something in my chest. I held onto that vision, though part of me knew better. I remembered the little signs, her voice too bright, the details about the suit and the car, the expensive restaurant. They all pointed to the same conclusion, yet I was desperate for a reason to go beyond duty. I wanted to walk into that restaurant not as a wallet, not as a solution, but as a father welcomed at his daughter's side. Loneliness has a way of twisting your thoughts, of convincing you that scraps are feasts. The house felt too quiet most nights, the rooms too large without Linda's presence to fill them. Elaine's calls, even when they came with requests, were still calls. They still broke the silence. They still reminded me I was connected to someone, even if that connection came with strings attached. It is hard to give that up, so I reasoned with myself. Perhaps she had grown. Perhaps the baby news was coming, and this dinner was her way of letting me back into her life. Maybe she wanted me there not because of what I could provide, but because she needed her father's presence in a moment of joy. It was not impossible. People change, don't they? Children find their way back to the values they were raised with. It was a comforting thought, and for a time I let it rest in me like a fragile ember. I took out my old suit from the closet. Running my hand over the fabric, it smelled faintly of mothballs, but it was intact. I pictured myself wearing it Saturday night, walking into the glow of that restaurant, sitting down among her husband's family with quiet dignity. Maybe they would see me differently. Maybe she would see me differently. The image was thin, stretched almost to breaking, but it was enough to soften the edges of my doubt. By evening, the hope had grown larger than I intended. I brewed another cup of coffee, sat in my chair, and told myself aloud that this was going to be different. This was not about money. This was not about obligation. This was family. I needed to believe it, if only to survive the waiting hours until Saturday. Deep down, though, a voice whispered that I was fooling myself. I had ignored those warnings before, yet still I clung to hope, because hope is the last thing a lonely man lets go. Saturday evening came like the slow turn of a wheel I could not stop. By the time I stood in front of the mirror tying my old blue tie, the fragile hope I had carried all week was still there, but it trembled beneath a weight of unease. I slid into the suit that had served me for decades and felt the fabric tug at my shoulders. It was not the clothes of wealth or power, but it was what I had. I told myself that dignity could shine even through worn fabric. Driving into the city, my old Ford hummed beneath me, steady but out of place as I pulled into a neighborhood of glass towers and polished sidewalks. Moonlight stood among them like a jewel box, lit from within, its wide windows glowing against the night. A valet stepped forward as I rolled up, and I caught his brief glance at my car. No words were spoken, but I felt the judgment in that silence. I handed over the keys, telling myself I would not let it matter. Inside, the restaurant was all low light and quiet elegance, the kind of place where laughter was muted and everything seemed staged. White tablecloth stretched smooth as ice, silverware gleamed, and soft music floated through the air. I felt like I had stepped onto a stage, every move scrutinized, every detail designed to impress. The hostess led me across the room to a round table already filled. Elaine rose to greet me. She looked polished, her hair styled. Her dress a deep red that seemed chosen to match the occasion. Her hug was brief, perfunctory, a gesture for the sake of appearances rather than affection. She introduced me to the others as if I were a guest at the edge of her world, not her father. Noah sat beside her, his gray suit cut to perfection, his smile tight. Across from them were his parents, Hiram and Doris, figures I had always found difficult to bear. Hiram carried himself like a man used to being heard. His voice deep and certain, his cold blue eyes appraising everyone at the table. Doris smiled with thin lips, her tone measured, her words dipped in polite disdain. Their daughter Agatha was there as well, a younger mirror of her mother, with her husband Wesley, who spoke loudly about things I neither knew nor cared to know. I took my seat quietly, feeling the weight of their eyes. Conversations swirled around me, talk of the stock market, of overseas vacations, of property values rising in the highlands. I knew enough to understand the words, but not the world they described. Each sentence carried with it an unspoken message: we belong here, you do not. When Doris turned to me with forced courtesy, asking how retirement was treating me, her voice held the same edge as a knife dulled by overuse. I answered simply, mentioning my tutoring, my reading, my recent interest in astronomy. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that closed doors rather than opened them. Education, she said, was noble but not lucrative. The words stung more than I wanted to admit. Elaine chimed in quickly, defending me with compliments she had never spoken before, calling me a great teacher whose students went on to fine universities. For a brief moment my heart lifted, but even that felt less like pride in me and more like her attempt to justify my presence at the table. As if I needed to be explained, packaged in terms they could accept. The waiter brought menus, and I nearly choked at the prices. I ordered the simplest dish I could find, while the others chose steaks, lobsters, and wine that would cost more than my month's pension. Their laughter rose around me as glasses clinked, but none of it reached me. I sat in my chair, a man in an old suit surrounded by a family of wealth and ambition, and realized I was not meant to belong here. I was meant to serve a purpose. The atmosphere pressed down on me, heavy with luxury I could not afford and contempt I could not ignore. Still, I told myself to endure it, for Elaine, for the chance, however slim, that this night could bridge the years that had grown between us. But in the glances passed between her and Noah, in the smirk of Hiram, in the silence of Doris, I began to feel the truth rising in me like a tide. This was not a celebration. This was a transaction dressed in fine clothes. The meal moved along with the same polished rhythm as the restaurant itself. Appetizers were cleared, another bottle of wine appeared on the table, and the hum of conversation swelled. I sat mostly in silence, answering when addressed, nodding when someone's eyes flicked toward me, but otherwise invisible in the current of their world. I told myself that was fine. I was not here for them. I was here for Elaine. Then, in the middle of the laughter and clinking glasses, Doris lifted her glass and said something that shifted the tone. To family she toasted, and to the new life on the way. The words dropped into the air like stones into water. I felt the ripple before Elaine even opened her mouth. She blushed, her eyes darting to Noah and then back to the table. We were going to announce it later, she said, but since it's out now, we are expecting a baby. Her hand rested lightly on her stomach. For a moment, the table erupted in congratulations. Hiram beamed, Doris clasped her hands, Agatha squealed. Noah smiled like a man accepting a prize he had already counted on. I froze. The words sank into me slowly. A baby. My daughter was having a child. I was going to be a grandfather. For one flickering instant, joy rose in me, sharp and bright, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. I thought of Linda, of how her face would have lit up at this news. How she would have gathered Elaine into her arms with tears in her eyes. I whispered her name silently in my heart, wishing she could have lived to see this. But as quickly as the joy came, another feeling followed. The realization that I had not been told privately, not been given the chance to hear it from my daughter alone. Instead, I was learning the news in a crowded restaurant, surrounded by people who barely tolerated me. 5 months along, Elaine admitted almost casually, as if she were talking about a work project. 5 months, and this was the first I was hearing of it. My place in her life was clear. The congratulations continued, but I heard the undertones. Hiram spoke with pride about the future heir, already calling him a Berkeley before he was born. Doris beamed at the thought of another generation to carry the family name. And then Elaine, my daughter, said softly that they were thinking of naming the boy Hiram after his grandfather. Her words were meant to honor Noah's father, but to me they cut deep. My grandson would carry the name of a man who looked down on me, not the name of the father who had carried his daughter's life on his shoulders. I forced a smile, told her it was wonderful news, congratulated her, congratulated Noah. I said the words because they were expected, but inside the joy twisted into something harder. The baby should have been a bridge between us, a chance for love to return in a pure form. Instead, even before he was born, he was being used as leverage, a symbol of status. A bargaining chip in a game I had played too long. The way Elaine glanced at me then, a flash of calculation behind her eyes, told me what I had already begun to suspect. This baby, this new life, was not just joy. It was another way to tighten the chain around me, a way to make every future request sound noble, unavoidable. How could I say no when it was not just about my daughter anymore, but about my grandson? What kind of man would refuse to give his grandson the best, they would ask. The room glowed with celebration, but I felt cold. I remembered the little girl who once ran barefoot through the yard, laughing as I chased her, who once built a volcano with me for the school science fair. I remembered how she told me she wanted to be an explorer of the stars. That girl was gone, and in her place sat a woman who spoke of her unborn child as a legacy, a tool. A card to play at the table of power. I lifted my glass of water when the others toasted again, but the taste was bitter. I had thought in my fragile hope that this dinner might reconnect us. Instead, it had given me a glimpse of something darker. The good news was not a gift. It was a weapon wrapped in joy, and though I smiled, though I nodded, though I played the part, I knew the stakes had just been raised. When the plates were cleared, the room felt brighter and colder at the same time. I had pushed pasta around my plate while the others finished steaks and lobster. I thought the baby news was the peak of the evening. It was not. What came next was careful and practiced. Noah leaned back, one arm on the chair behind Elaine. He said they had been looking at a bigger place. Their current house was too tight for a growing family. He said it like a simple fact, the way a weatherman announces rain. Elaine nodded and added a name that hung in the air. The Highlands, quiet streets, successful neighbors, top-ranked schools. She looked at me when she said schools. Noah described the house as if he were showing it to me room by room, 4 bedrooms, a pool. A view of the mountains that would make sunsets look like postcards, space for birthdays and holidays, space for a grandfather to visit, he said, and his eyes settled on mine. Then he came to the part that mattered. The bank needed 20% down, a large number, the kind of number that does not sit quietly in a savings account. Elaine placed her hand over mine. She spoke softly, almost tender. Dad, maybe you could help. Think of it as an investment in your grandson's future. The sentence was sweet on the outside and sharp on the inside. Not a request for them, but for the child. Not a bill, but a cause. Refuse and you are refusing the baby. Agree and you are a good man. It was tidy framing. It was also a leash. I kept my face calm and my voice even. We can talk about it later, I said, in private. Elaine smiled too quickly. Impatience flashed and then vanished. Around the table, Noah's parents straightened, as if the scene had landed just where they wanted it. Agatha and Wesley traded a small smile that said they knew how this story ended. While their chatter resumed, I felt an old lesson rise to the surface. I had confused help with surrender. Every time I paid, I bought silence, not closeness. Every time I opened my wallet, I closed my voice. If I stepped into this deal, there would be no end. The house would lead to furniture, to nursery upgrades, to tuition strategies, to a new car safe enough for a baby. Each step would be framed the same way. For the child, I studied Elaine's face. She looked composed, even kind, but the kindness was a tool. I remembered the little girl who asked why the sky was blue. Now she asked how deep my pockets ran. I felt sadness first, then a firm, quiet clarity. I lifted my water and took a slow drink. Let them think I was considering it. The decision had already been made. I would not buy my place in this family. I would not pour what was left of my life into a hole dressed as a view of the mountains. The violins from the sound system drifted over the table. Candles flickered. Plates returned for dessert. Noah laughed at something his father said. Elaine tucked a hair behind her ear and glanced at the folder the waiter carried past. The real test was coming, and I could feel my heart steady itself for it. The evening had reached that quiet lull when the laughter thins out and plates are cleared. Dessert was gone, coffee cups half empty, and the music from the speakers drifted like smoke. For most families, this is the hour when the night winds down, when stories are exchanged and goodbyes begin. For us, it was the moment everything sharpened. The waiter approached with a polished leather folder in his hand. He set it down in the center of the table, his gesture neat and practiced. Yet the silence that followed was anything but casual. I saw it happen in an instant. Noah's hand froze on his wine glass. Doris stopped speaking mid-sentence. Even Agatha glanced away as if suddenly fascinated by the wall. And then the stillness turned as if pulled by a string, and all their eyes fell on me. It was not spoken, not yet, but it did not need to be. The role had already been written long before this dinner began. I was not the guest, not the father being honored, not even the future grandfather to be celebrated. I was the sponsor, the one who signed the check so the story could end clean. I rested my hand on the table and let the moment stretch. The waiter stood waiting, not leaving, his eyes flicking from the folder to me. It was clear he had been told in advance. The bill belonged to me before I had even walked through the door. I remembered every step that had led to this stage. The instructions on the phone call: wear a suit, bring the car so I would look the part. The careful choice of restaurant, the most expensive in town. The sudden announcement of the baby, timed for maximum effect. And now, the final act, the bill laid in front of me like a test I was expected to pass without hesitation. For a moment, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of the sheer boldness of it. My daughter, who once held my hand at science fairs and begged me to explain constellations, had brought me here as nothing more than a purse in human form. My chest tightened, not from shame, but from the deep ache of recognition. Elaine shifted in her seat. She looked at me with a mixture of expectation and tension. Noah leaned back, confident. His parents sat like royalty, certain of the ending, around us. Other tables continued their dinners unaware, but for me the restaurant had gone silent. I reached for the folder. My fingers rested on its edge, and in that pause memories flooded through me. Tuition bills, wedding loans, the down payment on their first house, the car repairs, the vacations, the remodels. Each sacrifice stacked on the last, forming a tower that had bent my back for years. And now, at the base of that tower, they wanted me to add one more stone. I opened the folder, my eyes slid across the numbers. The sum was staggering, months of my pension for one evening of excess. Wines I never drank, dishes I never ordered, laughter I was never part of. The paper might as well have been a mirror. In it I saw myself as they saw me, useful, silent, expendable. I closed the folder gently and set it back in the center of the table. My heart was steady now. The battlefield lines had been drawn, and I understood my place in them. I was meant to give, to carry, to pay, but for the first time in years I felt the stir of something else. Resistance. The waiter waited, my daughter waited, the whole table waited. The script was clear, but I had no intention of following it. The bill lay there between us, but it was more than a bill. It was a verdict, and I was about to choose whether to accept it or break it. The folder sat on the table like a weight no one wanted to touch. The waiter lingered. His hands folded neatly, his eyes steady but curious. It was as if he too had been told the ending, that the gray-haired man in the old suit would pick up the bill, sign the slip, and leave in silence. I placed my hand on the folder again, but this time I did not open it. I looked around the table instead. Noah's father avoided my eyes, sipping his wine with the calm certainty of a man who expected victory. Doris dabbed her lips with her napkin as if this was all beneath her. Agatha fiddled with her necklace. Wesley tapped his fingers against the stem of his glass. And my daughter, my only child, sat rigid, her face tense, her eyes darting from me to the bill, as if willing me to play my part. I opened the folder once more, glanced at the sum, and then closed it with a quiet click. I stood. The chair scraped the floor, sharp and loud, cutting through the murmur of the restaurant. Conversation at nearby tables faltered, heads turned, a hush spread wider than I could have imagined. "I have to go," I said. My voice was calm, but the words carried. Elaine's head snapped toward me. "Dad, where are you going? We're not finished." I slipped into my jacket slowly, carefully. "I am finished." Her voice rose, tight and panicked. "But you were supposed to pay. I was counting on you." The sentence rang through the restaurant, drawing even more eyes. The mask dropped, and with it the illusion of a family dinner. The truth lay bare on the table. I was here to be the wallet, nothing more. I turned to her. My words were measured, but they struck with the weight of years. "Your bill, or the bill of your husband's family, who ordered the finest food and the most expensive wine, knowing full well that I would be expected to cover it." She flushed, anger and embarrassment mixing on her face. Noah lowered his gaze, unwilling to meet mine. His parents stiffened, their contempt sharpened but unspoken. "I have paid enough," I continued. "I paid for your education, your wedding, your house, your car repairs, your renovations. I gave until I was empty, and never once in all those years." Did you call me just to ask how I was? Never once did you invite me where my presence alone was enough. Elaine stammered, "That's not true," but her voice trembled and the denial fell flat. "I will always love you," I said, and my throat tightened around the words, "but I will not be your ATM anymore, not tonight, not ever again." The silence was absolute. Every face at our table was frozen. People at nearby tables pretended not to listen. Their stillness betrayed them. The waiter, still holding his notepad, shifted awkwardly as if unsure whether to stay or retreat. I adjusted my jacket, straightened my tie. "If you want me in your life, it will be as your father, not as your bank account. If that is not enough, then perhaps I am not needed here at all." For the first time that evening, I felt no shame, no fear, only clarity. The roles they had written for me were ashes now, and I was free to step out of them. I left the folder on the table, untouched. The decision was made. The drive home that night was strangely calm. The streets were empty, and the hum of my old Ford steadied my hands as the adrenaline drained away. I replayed the scene in my mind, the bill, the silence, my words, and felt something I had not felt in years: relief. By the time I hung my suit back in the closet and sat down in my chair, the weight of decades had lifted. But the relief did not last long. My phone buzzed on the table, screen glowing in the dark, then again and again, until the vibration seemed to shake the wood. I picked it up. Messages from Elaine. The first was furious. "How could you humiliate me like that? Do you realize what you did in front of Noah's parents?" Another followed. "You are a terrible father. Mom would never have behaved like you." Each word was designed to cut, to pierce through the armor I had just built. Then came guilt. "I am pregnant and you made me cry all night. How can you do this to your daughter?" I set the phone face down, but it buzzed again. "If you don't apologize and cover the dinner, forget about seeing your grandson. We will not let you be part of his life if you can't even do this for us." The words landed heavier than the bill ever could. A baby, my grandson, the chance to hold him, to see him take his first steps, to tell him about the stars the way I once told his mother. And now all of that was being dangled in front of me like a bargaining chip. I spent the night turning in bed, the glow of the phone lighting the room every time another message came through. I read them all, every insult, every accusation, every threat. They were not cries of hurt. They were weapons, sharpened by years of practice. I could see it clearly now. My daughter and her husband had built an entire system of control, and every piece of it depended on one thing: my fear of being alone. By morning, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Noah on my porch, his silver car gleaming in the driveway. He did not bother with greetings. He stepped inside, looked around my modest living room with open disdain, and pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket. It was a copy of the bill. He laid it on my coffee table like evidence in a trial. "You owe us this," he said flatly. "You embarrassed Elaine. You ruined my birthday. You want to see your grandson, don't you? Then fix this." I looked at him for a long moment, at the smooth arrogance in his face, at the certainty in his voice. In that instant, I understood what this really was. Not about money, not even about family. It was about control. As long as I paid, as long as I yielded, they would own me. He went on, saying that Elaine cried all night, that she was fragile, that stress was dangerous for the baby. He said I had a responsibility as a father and future grandfather to provide. He called it duty, but I heard the truth behind the words: blackmail. The ultimatum was clear: pay and I could see my grandson; refuse and I would be cut off forever. I looked at the paper on the table, then back at him. My hands were steady now. For years I had let fear dictate my choices: fear of losing my daughter, fear of being left in silence. But standing there with Noah trying to tighten the leash, I realized something. Love twisted into coercion is not love at all. I pushed the paper back toward him. "I am not paying," I said quietly. His face flushed with anger, his jaw tightened, but I did not waver. "If you think you can keep a child from his grandfather because of money, then maybe the problem is not mine, maybe it is yours." For the first time, Noah looked uncertain. He gathered the paper, muttered a final threat, and stormed out, the door rattling behind him. His car roared down the street, leaving the house silent again. I sat there, my heart heavy but clear. They had shown me the final card in their deck, and I had chosen not to play. The days after Noah stormed out were quiet, but not empty. For the first time in years, I felt I could breathe without waiting for the phone to ring with another request. The silence of my house was no longer punishment. It was space, and I began to fill it with things that belonged only to me. I walked down to the library one morning and borrowed books on astronomy, something that had always lived in the back of my mind since my teaching days. One evening I carried my old telescope into the yard and turned it toward the stars. The first time I focused on Jupiter and its faint bands came into view, I felt a spark I thought had died with Linda. It reminded me that wonder still existed, even at 65, even in a house that once echoed with grief. Soon after, I joined the community astronomy club. They welcomed me as though I had been waiting for them all along. On Wednesday nights, I sat among people of all ages, sharing my knowledge of physics, listening to their excitement about the sky. On weekends, we drove out of town to darker fields, watching meteor showers streak across the heavens. For the first time since Linda's death, my life had rhythm, not routine but purpose. Photography followed. I dusted off the old camera Linda had given me years ago, and with encouragement from a neighbor named Beverly, I began taking pictures again. The first roll I developed showed the San Mateo Mountains glowing in morning light. I hung it on my wall, and for the first time my house felt alive again. 3 months passed, then a letter arrived in my mailbox. Written in Elaine's hand. Inside was a card with a stork on the front announcing the birth of her son, Hiram Edmund Berkeley, June 15th. The middle name was mine. I stood at the table staring at it, unsure whether it was an olive branch or another chain. At the bottom she had written, "Daddy, if you want to see your grandson, call me." I thought long and hard that night. The temptation to rush over, to hold the baby, to surrender just for a glimpse was strong, but I had learned. My door would be open, my arms ready, but not my wallet. Weeks later, Elaine came by, the baby carrier in her arms. She looked tired, her eyes lined, but when she placed the tiny child in my arms, everything in me softened. He was small, his fist curled tight, his breath quick. For a moment the world fell silent except for him. I whispered to him about the stars, about how vast the sky was, about how he was a piece of something greater. Elaine watched me. Then finally asked, "Dad, can you help us with the loan? It's hard with the baby." I looked at her, steady, calm. "Elaine, my door is always open. You and the baby are welcome here any time, but my wallet is not. If you want me in his life, it will be as his grandfather, not as your bank." Her lips tightened, resentment flickering across her face, but I did not back down. I handed her son back gently and smiled at him, not at her. That night after they left, I walked into the yard with my telescope. The Milky Way stretched across the sky, endless and unbending. I realized that setting boundaries was not closing the door. It was keeping it open for love and closing it only to manipulation. I had rebuilt myself piece by piece, through stars, through photographs, through small gatherings with new friends. And when my grandson came into the world, I met him not as a man drained by demands, but as a man whole again. My door was open, my wallet was closed, and for the first time that felt like freedom. One clear night I carried my telescope into the yard and tilted it toward the stars. Through the lens I traced the paths of distant planets, their steady arcs across the dark. I thought about how even the heavens follow their orbits and how sometimes a course must be corrected for light to break through. My life had been like that, years caught in someone else's pull, until I finally chose to adjust my path. I realized that fatherhood, like the stars, is not erased by distance. I still love my daughter, I always will, but love without boundaries is not devotion, it is surrender, and I will not surrender anymore. If Elaine knocks on my door because she wants to sit and talk, because she misses her father, I will open it without hesitation. If she comes holding her child, my grandson, and wants me to share in his life, I will welcome them both. But if she knocks only for money, if her words are dressed as duty but shaped as demand, then I will smile, remain still, and let the silence answer for me. The greatest gift I have reclaimed is not money, not freedom, not even peace. It is myself, the man I was before fear and guilt made me small. And under the stars that night I understood I had not lost a daughter. I had found the courage to be a father again.